The Astronine floated silently through the endless black of space. Stars flickered around it, cold and distant. Inside the ship, however, silence was broken by the blaring oxygen alarms. Red lights flashed, casting sharp shadows across the metal walls. The crew had minutes, maybe less, before the air ran out. Among the survivors were 5 Valorian scientists, tall and elegant, with shimmering blue skin and eyes like crystal. Their planet, Valoria, had thick, pure air and oceans that glowed faintly in the night. Space travel had been difficult for them. Their bodies were delicate and poorly suited for low-oxygen environments. And then there was Sergeant Mason Hale, a human, broad-shouldered and rugged. His face was marked by scars and a thick beard, earning him the nickname Grizzly among the aliens. Despite his rough appearance, his calm demeanor was comforting. While the Valorians panicked, Mason remained steady, assessing the situation. The disaster had been sudden. A meteor storm had pierced the ship's hull and damaged the oxygen processors. Emergency reserves had carried them for hours, but now only one small oxygen tank remained functional. Dr. Ilara, the Valorian leader, stood near the main console, trying to control her trembling hands. "The repair drones won't work," she said softly. "Without oxygen, we'll lose consciousness very soon." Mason knelt beside the oxygen gauges. Only 20% of breathable air remained. He calculated quickly. With 6 lives aboard and 1 oxygen tank, only 2 could survive for long. "How long for a rescue team to reach us?" Mason asked, his voice low. Ilara's shoulders drooped. "At least 3 hours. Maybe more. No one can reach us in time." Mason's eyes narrowed. He understood the gravity of the situation. Humans were different. They had survived extreme conditions on Earth, freezing mountains, scorching deserts, toxic environments. He could last longer than the Valorians. "Then we'll make our own time," he said, voice firm. The aliens looked at him, confused. Sacrifice was not part of their thinking, it was inefficient. But Mason didn't hesitate. He disconnected his own oxygen supply from the main system and began rerouting it into the shared splitter, which could sustain 5 Valorians. "Human, what are you doing?" asked Lyrian, one of the younger scientists. Her crystal eyes widened. "Making sure you all survive," Mason replied simply. For the Valorians, the concept of giving up one life for another was alien. Mason's face was pale, lips cracked, and breathing shallow, yet he kept working. The ship shook violently. Another fragment from the meteor storm hit the hull, creating a small breach and venting precious air into space. Mason threw himself against it, applying emergency foam to seal the leak. The foam hissed and hardened, and for a moment the ship was stable again. Mason stumbled but stayed upright. Ilara stepped closer. "You're giving everything. You'll suffocate." "Better me than you," he said, a faint grin on his face. "You're the future of your world." "I'm just a soldier." Minutes turned into tension-filled hours. Mason's vision blurred. His hands shook, but he kept the valve steady. The Valorians watching him felt a mixture of awe and guilt. On Valoria, such selfless behavior was rare. Humans were known in legend, but none had truly witnessed their courage firsthand. "Human," whispered Ilara, pressing a hand against the metal wall beside him. "Why? We barely know you." Mason gave a tired smile. "Doesn't matter. Life is life. You're worth saving." Time passed, each second heavier than the last. Frost began forming along the walls of the damaged ship. The Valorian's breathing became slow and controlled, conserving every drop of oxygen. Mason ignored the cold creeping over him. He thought of Earth, of trees and rivers, of friends and mountains. He thought of every challenge he had survived, every life he had protected. Then he looked at the aliens, 5 fragile forms depending on his strength. He would not fail them. "Keep calm," Mason said, voice barely above a whisper. "Don't waste energy. Focus on breathing slowly. Think of something nice." The aliens obeyed. Lyrian thought of Valoria's glowing oceans while Ilara pictured the forests of her homeworld. They drew comfort from their memories, holding on to life through the thin air Mason was giving them. Another warning light blinked. Power running low. The final oxygen tank was nearly empty. Mason's breaths came in shallow rasps, yet he remained upright, ensuring the splitter kept functioning. "I don't understand humans," Ilara said softly. "You are supposed to be fragile too, yet you endure." "We endure because we care," Mason said faintly. "Sometimes that's enough." Suddenly the ship shuddered. Another hit, closer this time, rattled the hull and threw Mason to the floor. Pain shot through his arm, but he forced himself up and sealed the new breach with the emergency foam. His body was failing, but his mind remained clear. The Valorians gasped, realizing the extent of his sacrifice. "Please, stop," Lyrian cried, tears forming. "We cannot let you die for us." Mason shook his head. "You'll survive. That's all that matters, humans. We do what we must." His legs trembled. His vision swam with darkness, but he refused to sit. He gripped the splitter's valves with hands that shook violently. The Valorians felt a warmth of gratitude they had never known, a realization that one human could change their lives forever. Minutes dragged on. The temperature fell further. Ice formed along the floors and walls. Yet Mason continued silent and steadfast. The final oxygen gauge dropped to 0. The Valorians gasped, realizing he had given everything he had to keep them alive. Then, in the distance, a soft, blinking light appeared. The distress beacon had finally transmitted. "We're going to be rescued," Alara whispered, tears streaming. Mason's eyes closed for a moment. He fell to his knees, exhausted beyond measure, but he had done it. The aliens were alive. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance, unaware of the human who had given his last breath so that others could live. Inside, 5 alien scientists watched him, hearts full of gratitude and awe. They would never forget the grisly human who sacrificed everything for them. And in that moment, humanity proved, once again, that courage and compassion could shine even in the darkest reaches of space. The silence of space was finally broken. A distant hum grew louder. A soft vibration through the hull of the Astra 9. The rescue fleet had arrived. Sleek Valorian ships, their silver-blue hulls shimmering like liquid metal, approached carefully. The distress beacon had worked. Hope had returned. Inside the damaged vessel, the 5 Valorian scientists gathered around the human who had kept them alive. Sergeant Mason Hale, the so-called Grizzly human, was slumped against a bulkhead. His breathing was faint, shallow, and uneven, but he was alive. The relief among the aliens was almost audible, even though their voices were soft and trembling. Alara knelt beside him, placing her delicate hand on his shoulder. "Mason, can you hear me?" Mason's eyelids flickered. He gave a weak, lopsided grin. "I hear you," he rasped. "You breathing?" Lyrian and the others nodded rapidly, their crystal eyes shining with gratitude. "Thanks to you, all of us. Alive," Alara whispered. Mason let out a small, humorless chuckle. "Told you, humans are stubborn, can survive. Longer than expected." The aliens' admiration for him deepened. They had observed human courage in simulations and stories, but this was real. This human had given his last oxygen, risking his life without hesitation simply to save them. The rescue drones arrived first. Small, spider-like machines with gentle arms, they began transferring the crew from the crippled ship. The Valorians were guided out carefully, still weak but conscious. Mason struggled to rise. The drones scanned his body and immediately began regulating oxygen directly to him. "Easy there, human," one of the drone's mechanical voices said softly. "We'll provide life support now." Mason closed his eyes for a moment, relief washing over him. For the first time, he could rest without fear. Once safely aboard the lead Valorian vessel, the Serenity, Mason was helped to a medical chamber. The room was bright and warm, filled with soft humming from the life support systems. The aliens watched silently as medical drones began repairing minor injuries and stabilizing his breathing. Alara approached him once the drones finished their initial work. "Mason, you almost gave everything for us." "Why? Why humans?" Mason looked at her, eyes tired but clear. "Because someone has to help. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter where you come from. Life is worth protecting. Always." Her eyes glimmered with tears. The words were simple, but the meaning went deeper than any logic or technology could explain. Humans, fragile yet strong, emotional yet fearless, were creatures of paradox. Mason embodied all of it. The Valorians took turns visiting him, bringing warm drinks and small gifts from their culture. One of them, Cyril, brought a glowing flower from Valoria, a symbol of respect and gratitude. She placed it gently beside him. "A token. For the human who saved lives," she said softly. Mason smiled faintly. "Keep it, and for your people. I don't need it." But the Valorians insisted. In their culture, tokens like these were sacred. It was not just a gift, it was a promise of friendship and recognition. Mason accepted, understanding it as best he could. Days passed. Mason's body regained strength under the careful attention of Valorian medical technology. The humans' endurance and courage became a story aboard the fleet, whispered among the crew and shared with new arrivals. Even those who had doubted humans began to see them differently. Alara sat by his side one evening as the stars streaked past through the observation window. "You two changed our view of humans," she said quietly. "Before this, we thought of your kind as simple, emotional, sometimes reckless, but you are extraordinary." Mason, now resting comfortably in a soft chair, shrugged with a small grin. "We're not perfect, but when it counts, we try, that's all." The Valorians had never seen someone act purely out of selflessness before. To them, the universe was a game of strategy, survival, and logic. Sacrifice was unnecessary, often considered foolish, but Mason had acted without hesitation. He had shown them a new kind of strength, one born of compassion, courage, and determination. Word spread throughout the fleet. Children and adults alike whispered about the human who had given his last oxygen to save lives. Mason became a symbol of bravery, not because he was stronger than anyone else, but because he chose to put others first. The fleet reached Valoria safely. The scientists were reunited with their families, their gratitude overflowing. Yet Mason did not leave with them immediately. The Valorian Council had insisted he stay for a ceremony in his honor. On the grand platform of Valoria's capital, beneath glowing arches and radiant light, Mason stood humbly as the Valorian leaders spoke. "Today we honor Sergeant Mason Hale, a human who reminded us what it means to be courageous, to be selfless, and to value life above all else," Alara said. The crowd, composed of thousands of Valorians, erupted in applause. Mason's rugged features softened into a genuine smile, his large hands gripping the sides of his coat. Later, in private, Alara approached him again. "Mason, we have many wonders on Valoria, but I think none compares to what we have witnessed in you." He chuckled lightly. "It was nothing. Just doing my job. I couldn't let anyone die if I could help it." Alara shook her head, smiling. "It was more than a job. You reminded us that courage is not just strength but heart. Humans are extraordinary." Mason looked out over the city, the glowing buildings reflecting off his tired eyes. He thought of Earth, of his home planet far away, but also of these new friends. In this vast universe there were infinite dangers, infinite unknowns, but also infinite possibilities. And somewhere in those possibilities humans had a role, to protect, to endure, and to inspire. From that day forward, the story of the Grizzly human who gave his last oxygen to save 5 alien scientists became legend, not just on Valoria, but throughout nearby systems. Children told the tale, engineers named ships after him, and diplomats referred to it as the first great example of interstellar friendship born from courage. Mason, however, remained humble. He returned to his duties as a human soldier, quietly helping wherever he could. Yet the bond he had formed with the Valorians endured. Every time he visited Valoria afterward, the blue-skinned scientist greeted him with smiles, small gifts, and a respect that no words could fully express. He had come as a soldier, but he had left as a symbol. A symbol that humans, with all their imperfections and rough edges, could shine brightest in the darkest moments. And as Mason looked up at the stars once more, he whispered softly, almost to himself, "No matter the distance, no matter the danger, life is always worth saving." The universe continued its endless dance, but one human had proven that even in the vast, cold expanse of space, courage, compassion, and selflessness could light the way for others, alien or human alike.